Hi, I'm Daniel Sands. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Bricks from Another Galaxy. So in my previous videos today, I've shown you some of the basic techniques of toy photography. I've shown you how I add smoke, how I use fireworks, how I add light. And really that's then accumulating in today's video where I'm going to introduce you to my processing workflow. I don't want that to sound too scary. All of these techniques that I use for the toy photography, I try and keep everything as a physical effect. And the reason I keep it as a physical effect is to make it more accessible to everybody. So you don't need an expensive camera, you don't need expensive software. And most of what I do, you can use off-the-shelf software packages for free on your phone, so the likes of Snapseed or Lightroom Mobile. I'm sure there's lots of photo editing apps that you can get on your phones nowadays that can do as good a job as what I'm going to be showing you today with Photoshop. So I'm going to dive in. You will be able to see my screen in real time, hopefully. This is all new to me. I've never done screen recording before, so hopefully this all works and you can see the screen okay. Okay, so here we are over in Lightroom. I use Lightroom to import all my images into as the first step. The reason I use Lightroom is because it offers very good controls for quickly going through a load of images and flagging which ones you want to take further. So I'm going to be using my recent fireworks shoot here. And as you may have guessed, I took a lot of photos. I actually had 3 fireworks that I could play with for this shoot, but I ended up taking 79 photos. I had my camera in burst mode, which takes I think 8 frames per second or something like that. So over the course of 3 seconds, you're talking 21 photos per firework, hence why I've got so many. So what I need to do as a first step in my processing workflow is to pick which images I like and which images are not so good. So personally I do that with a rating system. So I'll simply go through the images here that I've taken, and if I see one that I like, I'll quite simply just press the 1 on my keyboard, and down the bottom there that gives it a 1-star rating. And I'll continue this process going through all of the images that I like, giving them a 1-star rating until I've been through the whole set. I then apply a very quick filter down here at the bottom right, where you can filter all images to just those that are 1-star and above. So that gives me a second run, if you will, of images to go through. So now that I've marked them all as 1, I'll go through them again, and this time I'll pick out any that are really good and mark them as 2 stars. So obviously we've got far fewer images to go through now, so this is quite a quick process. So I like that one, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one. And then I'll do the same again. So once I've been through them all, I'll change the filter down here to 2 stars and higher. So now we're left with a selection of images that we're going to take further. In terms of the actual processing of these images, I shoot everything in RAW, and if that means nothing to you, don't worry about that at all. It just gives me more control over how the image is converted from what the camera sees into a JPEG image, and allows me to tweak things with more accuracy, if you will, in the result. So because I'm shooting in RAW, I'll go through some very quick, easy initial processing steps on these images. So I'll bring down the highlights a bit and bump up the shadows a bit. I'll always apply lens corrections just to get rid of, I can show you there, So you can see it's quite dark in the corners, and if we apply the profile corrections, it just sorts that out. There's also a bit of distortion on the lens that I'm using, which is corrected in Lightroom very well. So I'll process each of the images in a similar fashion that I've marked as 2 stars. At this stage, if I find that any of the images aren't working or I can't quite make them look how I want to at this stage, I will sometimes mark them down as 1 to take them out of this processing workflow. But what you will see is I've got 8 photos selected here, and I'll go through them quickly. So the first one here I picked out because I like how these sparks are hitting the side of the wing here. I intentionally, if I zoomed in on that, I intentionally didn't actually connect this wing fully. So I was always planning to have that kind of bursting off or to be the weak point in this explosion. So I like how the sparks are hitting the side of that wing there, so I've included that one. This one I like how the smoke's billowing up. This one I like how the flame's coming out and hitting this wing here. Similar, so we've got quite a nice explosion coming out of the hatch here and hitting that wing. And then this is the opposite, so this is highlighting this side of the wing quite nicely. Nice explosion effect, nice smoke billowing into the air. I like the cascade of embers coming down here. And this one I really like how the embers are coming, look like they're coming towards the camera. And again, I like how this one has caught the light on the wing there, it gives it quite nice definition. So there's 8 images there that I've picked out with their individual merits. When we're working with fireworks in particular, and when we're working with the smoke, as you would have seen in the previous video, it's quite short-lived, and really it's not possible to get everything that you want in a single frame. This frame is pretty close. I like how the embers are coming flying off towards the camera, but I don't like that there's not a lot of definition in the TIE Fighter itself. Like I mentioned earlier, I really wanted to show some explosion coming off this wing here. So what I'll do as my next step is I'll actually select all of these images, I'll right click, I'll go to edit in, and I'll open them as layers in Photoshop. Now what that's going to do is it's going to take each of them 8 images, it's going to load them all into a single file in Photoshop, one on top of the other as layers, and once that process is complete, we'll come back to it. So here we are. Lightroom has passed each of the 8 images over to Photoshop, one on top of the other, and it's at this stage that I'll say goodbye to Lightroom. I've done everything I need to over there, so everything I'm going to do now I'm going to do solely in Photoshop. So the first thing I do is select all of the layers, so I'm going to press the first layer over on the right here, hold down the Shift key on Windows and select the bottom layer to select them all. Now I'm going to go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, leave that as automatic. You have the lens correction options in here as well if you didn't already apply them, which is quite handy, but I've already done that, so I'm going to leave them unticked, leave that as automatic. Now what this is going to do is it's going to do its best to align each of these layers on top of each other based on the edges that it finds. In this situation you can see I've got the TIE Fighter hanging on my washing line. It wasn't a particularly windy day, but where the fireworks are going off and I'm putting a new ball in, there will be some slight movement from one shot to the other. So what Photoshop has done there is it's done its best to align each of the images on top of each other. And it's done a pretty good job really. There's still a little bit of movement there, but I'm not too fussed about that. So the next thing I'll do is I'll choose which image I want to use as my base image. It's pretty arbitrary which image I go for, but generally it's the image that I want to keep the most of. So as we was going through the image selection process in Lightroom, I mentioned that this image as a single frame is my favourite, but I just don't like how we've not got the light on the TIE fighter there. So I'm going to go with this image as my base, so I'm just going to move that down to the bottom. So now what I'm going to do is use one of my favourite tools in Photoshop, and it's one of the only tools, well actually I think Photoshop is worth its weight in gold. It's worth every penny, because it's the ContentAware Fill. And the ContentAware Fill tool pretty much does what it says on the tin. It can fill any area, but Photoshop has a very clever algorithm where it will compare the pixels of the surrounding area, and it will automatically fill based on, you know, the colours and the textures that are around it. So in particular this scene, you can see we've got all this support structure with the washing line and the cables holding up our TIE fighter in place. This is the most common thing that I will edit out in an end image. I do try and, like I say, keep all of the effects physical, but you will normally be left with some kind of support structure, some string or a Lego substructure that you've put together to hold your model where you want it to be. And it's important we know how to remove that in post-processing. So the first way I'm going to use the ContentAware Fill is with the spot healing brush here. And we make sure that we have a ContentAware type selected at the top. So I'm going to make my brush size just big enough to cover the washing line. I'm going to click the start of the washing line, hold down the shift key for a straight line, select where it changes, and select again up there. So it's done a pretty good job over here. Over here I must have missed a line a bit, so I'm just going to go back over that again and repeat that process until the washing line is gone. Go quickly over the peg, just tracing the shape of it there, going a bit over the edges just to allow for a bit of a blending. We don't want a hard edge. That's not done a fantastic job there, but what I'm going to do is make my brush a bit bigger just to soften out them edges a bit. There we go. So that's done a pretty good job. I'm going to put my size back down again and repeat the process for all of these other supporting lines and wires. So with Snapseed on mobile, you can do this. With a lot of photo editing applications, you can do this. Like I say, I think Photoshop has a fantastic algorithm built in that it just seems to know what should be there. I don't know how it works, but yeah. So there you go, that's taken us a few minutes and we've got rid of the supporting structure quite easily. Now, I wish I could have done this in a massive open space in the middle of nowhere where I would have had no structures around. Sadly, I don't have a huge back garden, I have a courtyard garden. So like many of you, I'm sure, across the country, you will be left with buildings in your shot like this. Thankfully, this is again where the Photoshop ContentAware Fill comes in so handy. And I'm going to be quite rough with this. I'm just going to select the Polygonal Lasso tool. I'm going to make a very rough selection around the buildings here. and the chimneys and aerials, whatever you might have in your shot that needs to be tidied up. So I'm not getting too close to the edges, but what I am doing is roughly tracing the outline of the shape. I found that helps with Photoshop identifying what it is you're trying to actually get rid of. So there we go, we've made a rough selection of our buildings and the rooftop here. And on Windows I'm going to press the Shift and Backspace key to bring up the fill window. You can also do that in Edit, Fill, up here, and we just want to make sure that the contents is selected as content aware with color adaptation. And we'll click OK. So Photoshop will think for a few seconds, and then we'll have a result. There we go. So Photoshop has figured out very well that in that area where the buildings were, there should have been more smoke, there should have been more embers. It's drawn in all this down here. It's absolutely invaluable, I think, as a tool. So I can show you the before and after of this frame. We've only spent a few minutes with the Content Aware tool. There's the before and there's the after. It's quite unrecognisable, I'd say. And that's again the tool in Photoshop that I will use the absolute most. There's almost always something in one of the shots that you need to get rid of, like so it's a support structure or otherwise maybe just a bit of distracting bit of baking soda that's gone somewhere you don't want it to. It does a really fantastic job. So from there what I'll do is I'll start enabling the other layers again, and I will always set the blend mode generally to lighten, and what that will do is it will just include the light parts of the frame that we're putting over the top. So in this case you can see it's adding a few embers, and I'll flick backwards and forwards between having a layer on, having a layer off, and I'll make a judgment call whether actually that layer is adding anything to the scene. In this example I don't think it is. It's adding a few embers, but it's taking away this nice smoke down here, so I'm going to move on to the next layer. So this layer has the flames coming up around the cockpit, which are quite nice. So if you stick lighting on that, there we go. So you can see that's overlaid over the top very nicely there. I'm not sure that I like it getting rid of the smoke down here, so what I'll do is I'm going to apply a mask, which is this button down the bottom here, and I'll hold down Alt and click, and what that's done is it's defaulted to an all black mask. An all black mask means that nothing's visible, and what we can then do is if we select a white brush, we can start drawing in the areas that we want to be visible with a white brush. So there we go, you can see it's just added that area, which is working very nicely. So I'll continue that process onto the next picture. So this has added a bit of flame coming out the cockpit hitting that wing, so we're going to see what that looks like. Again, I quite like that, but I don't like how it's getting rid of the smoke, so I'm going to do exactly the same process. Alt click mask, gives it a black mask. Move over to the brush with a white forecolor and just draw in how it's hitting that wing there. Onto the next layer. So this one I liked that it was adding the flame hitting the left wing. So we're going to again apply lighten. Quite a similar story. Don't really like how it's getting rid of the smoke, so I'm going to just keep that side of it in. And on to the next. I don't think that's really adding much really in the explosion area there. It's getting rid of a lot of the smoke, which I don't like, so I'm not going to have that layer. We move on to the next one. Again, change to lighten. Now that's basically not helping at all because it's introduced our buildings again, which we can get rid of. We can obviously repeat the process with the healing tool and the ContentAware Fill to get rid of them on this layer. But really I'm not sure that that's adding much to the image to warrant going through that process again. So I'm going to leave that layer off. And on to the last one, lighten again. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think that's adding an awful lot, so I'm going to keep that off. So we're left with here, we've got 4 layers from the original 8 selected, and they're all on top of each other with lighten on top of that base image with the sparks coming towards us. Okay, so I may well play with this a little further. I may change some of these blending modes to the layers that I've disregarded, change them maybe to overlay or soft light, hard light, bring down the opacity a bit, see if that helps in any way. It's not for this one, but it's generally just a play around process at this stage to see what's working. I'm quite happy with that now, and I think this is pretty close to where I got to with the final image. So just to show them layers building up again, so that's our base layer. We had a bit of flame, another bit of flame, and another bit of flame. So we've got 3 explosions layered into one image with the masks. So there we go. So on the screen now, I'm going to show you a before processing image and an after processing image so you can get the full picture. I don't want to go too advanced into how to use Lightroom, you know, the basics of importing or anything like that. If you are using Lightroom, there's 1,000,001 tutorials on the web which will do a much better job of showing you the basics than I could possibly do. And the same with Photoshop. If you type in ContentAware Fill into Google, I'm sure you'd get some much more useful tutorials than what I've shown you here today. But it's just to say that the techniques that I use, so I almost always use ContentAware Fill for something, whether it be to reduce, to remove a supporting structure, or to remove some embers that aren't quite where I want them. Almost always use multiple exposures layered on top of each other, and normally with a lighten mode to bring the light to where I want it. So that's it for today's video. I hope you found this brief introduction to my processing workflow beneficial. Do go and have a play around with ContentAware Fill or heal brushes, or remove element brushes. I'm sure in different apps it's called different things. If you have any questions about how I use Lightroom, how I use Photoshop, do please leave a comment below, or drop me a message on my Instagram page, which is Daniel Sands Photography. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the end image, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.